This is looking good, and looking by the number, we got a critical mass. So I'm going to jump right on in here. For those of you I haven't had an opportunity to meet yet, my name's Jason Gadoff, and I run product marketing here at MaintainX. And I have the privilege of hosting this webinar as we unveil the findings from the 2026, the State of Industrial Maintenance. Before we jump into the data, I want to go through a couple of the housekeeping. So first of all, this webinar is being recorded. You will get that recording by tomorrow. So we want you to be engaged, paying attention. If you want to take notes, that's fine, but you will get a recording. We also want this to be interactive. So you can ask questions throughout the webinar using the QA feature that you can see on the right-hand side of your screen. So with that, we're going to jump right on in here to talk about the state of industrial maintenance. And I'm joined by two all-star guests. Start by introducing Dan Anderson, who is the chairman of the board of directors of SMRP. He's been in the industry for decades, which is fantastic. He currently serves as the senior director of consulting at TRM. You know, he's just a seasoned pro, CMRP and CRL certified. Thank you, Dan, for taking the time to join us today.
My pleasure, Jason. Thank you for having me.
And we're also joined by MaintainX co-founder, Nick Haas. You know, he's at the epicenter of many of our strategic initiatives, spends lots of times working with our enterprise customers, our largest customers, and just being out in the market, talking to all of our customers, understanding what's actually happening. So Nick, really appreciate you taking the time to be here today.
Super excited to be here. Super excited for the report, and excited to see we've got a group of people excited to hear it. So,
right. So let's jump into the report itself. This is the third year in a row that we've run this report. And every year the survey base has gotten bigger and bigger. And the reason for that is we want to make sure that we are getting a pulse on the reality of what's happening with maintenance and operations professionals. So this year we surveyed more than 2,000 professionals at the beginning of this year across the US and Canada to understand the key trends and challenges that they're facing this year. So, and today is the unveiling of all of that data. And by joining this webinar, you will also get the actual report itself. So it's a long report, but if I was to summarize the key findings, I boil them down to these three key core buckets. Unplanned downtime isn't moving in the right direction. And what I mean by that is both the quantity of unplanned downtime and the cost. We're also finding that maintenance strategies are proactive in theory, but they're actually reactive in practice. And this is a trend that we've noticed for the last 3 years in a row, that despite investment in technology, evolving maintenance strategy, there's still this gap between what people want to do and what they're actually doing, and that there is more firefighting than anyone really wants there to be today. And then we can't have a webinar in 2026 without talking about AI. And AI is going mainstream fast. And one of the key differences that we identified is that teams are actually seeing value very quickly. We really wanted to lean into the value, because while AI is, you can't escape that in the conversations today, we really wanted to ask the practitioners, are they seeing value? And we have data to tell that story later on in this presentation. So let's jump right on into some of the key findings. One of the first key questions that we asked was, has your facility experienced more or less unplanned downtime in the last 12 months? And as you can see, only 21% of people saw less unplanned downtime, leaving 79% experiencing the same or more unplanned downtime since last year. So I want to take this as a chance. Dan, I'd love your reaction to this. As you're out in the market, as you're talking to folks, how does this align with what you're seeing in the market?
Yeah, it's a great point there, Jason. And I would align with those numbers as well, too. Just simply for the fact that, a lot of organizations, although they might be making measures to improve reactive maintenance, by getting planners in place, by having reliability engineers, by working to really shore up their storeroom procedures, reactive maintenance is still the norm that's out there, unfortunately. So a lot of times what I'm seeing with folks is that they're making strides to do this, but, within the organization and really doing things differently, it's very difficult for organizations to turn that ship around. and build a culture of proactive maintenance into their programs. So that's what I'm seeing. So I think these numbers reflect that very well, Jason.
Fantastic. Nick, how about yourself? What are you seeing out there?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of pressure on this entire ecosystem and industry right now that's coming from just the macroeconomic factors, but also the number, and we'll get into some of the details later. But there's step functional improvement is no longer enough to dramatically improve. That's going to kind of keep you at your baseline of. This is why this number is pretty similar to what we had last year, and what we were seeing. So I think it really requires a full intentional effort of bringing your organization and transforming your organization at a very rapidly different level if you want to see different results. And it may sound scary, but it's really just a shift in thinking from the leadership down that can help kind of get folks in the right direction. And but that's why you're seeing so many folks are still sort of stuck in place.
Great.
Yeah, I'd agree with that 100%, Nick. And if you even look at even aging assets and getting a handle around those right now, and lack of capital funding for those assets, and the number of variables that folks have to deal with in the manufacturing space,
Right.
it's quite a challenge out there right now in the market.
Yeah, I think the BEA data was showing like the average age of U.S. private non-residential fixed assets over 16 years, and structures are more than 24 years old. And so we're running 2026 production demands on equipment built from a different era. So it's
Amen.
yeah.
And I love this. We're talking about the key problems. You're talking about what you're seeing in the market. And then when we ask people, we actually ask leaders what they are doing to reduce this unplanned downtime. And if you can tell by the results, the number one thing is improving training quality and frequency. And I love that. I love that the number one thing is like investing in the humans actually doing the work. And building off the point that Nick just mentioned, there's a lot of old equipment out there. So people are trying to make the moves to replace that aging equipment while also investing in newer things such as automation and new technology. So the way the respondents actually voted is very in line with both what Dan and Nick were saying. And shifting gears a bit, because we're talking about the amount of unplanned downtime. But when it comes to the cost of unplanned downtime, we saw that the majority of customers had either seen it increase or stay the same. Only 16% had seen their costs decrease. And as we've mentioned earlier in this call, with all these investments in technologies, one would hope that some of these costs would decrease. But when it comes to what is driving this increased cost of downtime, the number one reason was rising cost of parts and shipping, right? And I think for anyone reading the news, that shouldn't be a surprise that's one of the key factors. The second factor is increased cost of labor, and then wear and tear on critical assets. Once again, building upon what Nick was just mentioning, that we do have aging infrastructure that a lot of companies are dealing with. But then switching gears to solution mode, how are customers planning to address this head on, this cost? First and foremost is improved parts and inventory management, right? Because of that, the parts cost is such a big driver of the cost. They are investing their energy and their time there. And then there's additional investment in TPM and lean initiatives. And then there's also people investing in EAM or CMMS software. So I do want to pause here talking about, and I'll open this question up to you, Dan, again. When you think about, are you seeing that rising cost is a front of mind issue for customers, the companies out in the market that you see, and how are they addressing that?
I think a lot of times, Jason, the way companies, or at least some of the companies that I'm working with address that factor is just to build a business case for it, right? And it doesn't have to be something as complex and overly thought out as, how much is 1 point of OEE, even though if you can get that granular, that certainly helps. But if you can look at improved productivity, reduced inventory, reducing overtime, contractor costs. A lot of folks use contractors to come out and do a lot of this maintenance and work on machines. And just, the overall output when it comes to scheduled and unscheduled downtime on your machines. being able to quantify that up to site leadership, and I think that'll be a reoccurring theme of our conversation today, is just, how do you build that culture and how do you start, from the front end? And I think it's building executive awareness of the value your assets can provide to the organization at the end of the day, but then being able to quantify that and say, hey, we're missing out on this much money. And that could be through measuring OEE on a production line. It could be through measuring total effective equipment performance, which are short and start and stop times that happen throughout the day. Maybe stuff that's not where you're not going out there and replacing a spare part on a machine, but how many modifications have we had to make on a production line, and what's the overall output at the end of the day? But I think, to answer your question, Jason, it's just building that awareness from the top down, from the C-suite leadership all the way down to the shop floor.
Got it. Appreciate that. Nick, anything else to add related to the costs of downtime?
Yeah, I mean, I think the reason you're seeing, these are some of the places people are trying to address is because they know where the pain is coming from. And I think everything plus one to everything Dan said here, but you can't do all of those things unless you've got a technology solution or some sort of process and tool that helps you capture that data, helps you manage it, helps you make decisions on it. And if you've got a solution right now that's not helping you do that, you've got to figure out how to make it work, or find a solution that can. Because really, like, it's the reason it's showing up as one of the top, CMMS is showing up as a top downtime reducer is because it makes the other two initiatives work. If you can't track your parts usage and you're not monitoring that effectively, you're paying, your average folks are paying like $50,000 a month in stock in hot shipping fees alone, just because they're stocking out and they need it. And even one of the commenters brought up a good point that there's, there are quality issues happening with certain OEM parts. And if you're not monitoring that at scale or monitoring that, tracking that data, it's hard to detect those patterns. So all roads sort of lead through giving folks the tools to help them get some of these goals accomplished and improve that cost.
Great.
Yeah, I'd say 100%, Nick. That data configuration and making sure that you have good data within your system to make data-driven decisions that support your overall metrics and programs. I think that's of the utmost importance.
Fantastic. Now, switching gears a little bit more, we asked the participants which maintenance programs are actively in use in your facility, trying to get a better understanding what's the percentage of preventative maintenance versus usage-based maintenance versus condition-based maintenance. And you can see by the chart here, and you'll get this in the report after this webinar, that the majority of customers, they're deploying preventative maintenance. One of the things that has changed noticeably over recent years is that there's an increasing number of folks deploying more usage-based and condition-based maintenance, right? And that shouldn't be surprising. And that led to the follow-on question that we asked here, is like, which best describes your organization's use of real-time equipment monitoring? And this could be things such as a variety of sensors, right? And you can see that there's a large number of companies out there that are actually deploying some form of real-time equipment monitoring to inform their maintenance strategy. So one of the things I want to do is I want to throw out a poll here to see what the people on this call have to say right now. We want to get a better sense of, given all this investment in technology that we're seeing from the market, do the people on this webinar today spend more than 50% of your time on planned maintenance or less? So please take a moment and respond. All right, we got more people who can respond than this.
They're coming in. I mean, didn't realize it was going to be interactive.
All right, we'll give it.
We can't see who your votes are, so you're anonymous. It's a safe space, folks.
Good caveat. I think this is directional, right? I think we've got enough, but what we're saying here is that the majority of people, it's only a slight majority, but the majority of people on this webinar spend less than 50% of their time on unplanned downtime, right? Which is actually better. We did more granularity in the actual report itself than what we're seeing when we look at when we looked at the broader audience of 2,000 plus respondents, right? When you look at this chart to the right, what you can tell here is that half of respondents dedicate less than 40% of their time, right? And only a small percentage is actually spending more than 60% of their time on unplanned downtime. In this gap, we're investing in preventative maintenance approaches, we're investing in technology, yet regardless if it was the poll we just did with the group or it's the data that we have in this research, the majority of people are still largely in firefighting mode, spending the majority of their time in reactive, not dealing with planned activities. So, Nick, you've been very involved with this report for all 3 years we've run it, and this has been a pattern all 3 years. I'd love your perspective on this kind of gap that we see between intention and the reality of how people actually spend their time.
Yeah, I mean, it's the unplanned downtime paradox, which is that you're trying to be more proactive. Everyone wants we're not having to tell people it's a good idea to be proactive, and they're like, I don't agree. We like reactive. Like it's not a controversial concept or theory in it, but the reality is folks are still struggling uh, to sort of you're still stuck in this firefighting mode because their execution maturity hasn't caught up to their program's ambitions. And so that's the challenge is like people think if I buy software, it fixes it. But they don't understand. A lot of them still struggle with that change management culture of understanding, like, if we, they're still struggling with those weak PM programs that aren't solving real problems. They don't go back and do any analysis to think, how do we optimize? How do we do more or less of these things? Doing root cause analysis to understand, what's driving these failures. And a lot of folks are stuck like saying, I don't know if we have time or the expertise or the resources to do those things. And it brings you back to the front line where capacity is your bottleneck. Like when teams are pulled into reactive work, your planned work loses. And so solving that means, being able to make the expertise on the floor scale and will bridge us to some of the things that we're going to talk about with AI later. But there's a lot of opportunity, I think, for folks to understand how to kind of turn the corner to start getting the actual reality to where they want to be.
Love that. And Dan, before I hand it off to you, I've gotten a couple questions in the chat. I should have reiterated this at the front. Everyone on this webinar is getting a preview of the report. The report's not actually released yet. It's going to be released later this afternoon, immediately after this webinar. So later today, you'll all get access to the report. I just wanted to make that comment because I've had a couple questions asking when they'll get the report, and it's going to be as soon as it's published. And we really wanted to position this webinar as a not so sneak preview. So now, Dan, I do want to ask the same question to you. This gap between the desire to do more preventative planned work and the reality of how people are actually spending your time, how do you see that in the market?
Probably the most successful organizations that have taken themselves from reactive to world-class maintenance programs are ones that reward proactive behaviors and don't reward the reactive behaviors. And I'll give you an example here, Jason, right? A lot of folks have heard about this maintenance Tarzan, which is, a machine goes down in the middle of the night, a technician gets called in, they come in after hours, get the machine back up and running on a Thursday or a Wednesday night, let's say. And then on Friday, the company has a picnic for the technician who's come in and got the machine back up and running. But the folks that aren't there, operators and maintenance doing, daily maintenance checks on machines to make sure that, that belt keeps from squealing or that bearing is properly lubricated. They're not getting rewarded like the person who came in and got rewarded for getting that machine back up and running. So I like to look at it, Jason, as a culture within an organization. And if they're able to really kind of endorse and reward the operators, the maintenance technicians for doing their daily maintenance checks and keeping that asset up and running, those are the ones that are really good. And those are the ones that are going to impactfully make that migration into being more proactive in the way that they're handling their maintenance activities.
That's
Yeah,
great.
you don't get a lot of attaboys for keeping things running.
Amen. Yeah.
Fair enough. And I do actually want to, someone asked a question in the chat, so I just want to address it head on because I think it's very well timed. about looking at the data by size of company. And we actually looked at the data by size and company and tried to slice and dice it. And the reality is the numbers are directionally the same no matter what we look. The biggest organizations with more than 5,000 employees and massive maintenance teams had a very similar distribution as those companies, smaller companies with 250 total employees and a much smaller team of maintenance techs. We were actually hoping to find a bigger delta that we can call out, but the distribution actually was very consistent across size of company. But that's something we will absolutely keep an eye on in years to come.
Yeah, because he also asked like if private companies and public companies are having different, if we're seeing different trends there, and like anecdotally at least, I can tell you that these are challenges that exist from mom and pop to enterprise, and I can tell you the opportunity cost of solving these is greater at the enterprise because of for obvious reasons there. But I haven't seen a strong correlation, frankly, of reliability maturity based on organization size or composition, that sort of thing. And that's surprising, to be honest. I would expect to see, some of the bigger folks fish out there, maybe a little further along, but the trend line doesn't seem to hold.
Got it. And we've spent a fair amount of the time in the first part of this conversation talking about some of the challenges, right? We're also talking about solutions, but we're talking about some of the challenges. One thing we also wanted to be clear here is that team size and budgets are increasing or staying the same. So, and this is similar, this was a consistent across size of company. When we asked companies, when we asked the people who participated, how will the size of your maintenance team change in the next 12 months? 45%, nearly 50% of people said they expect their maintenance team to increase, right? And then when we talked about the budget, even more, a higher percentage, 51%, just over 50%, said that they expect their budget to change in the next 12 months. And to be very transparent, I did not expect these numbers to be quite so high. I expected there to be a slightly more of a distribution where it'd be more of a stay the same, and increase versus decrease might be more equaled out. But that nearly 50% of all respondents think that their teams, the size of their teams and their budgets will increase. I think that was slightly surprising to me. So I want to pass that to you, Dan. What's your reaction to this data?
I'm quite surprised at it as well, too, Jason. I would think it'd be much lower, but maybe it is a little bit of a hangover that we're coming out of from the COVID years, where folks aren't working as remote anymore, that they're more hands-on site, and recognize the need. A lot of times when you're investing in your maintenance and reliability programs, there's not, you can't lean those out. You need additional folks that are going to come in and bring that expertise, or even move around folks from positions that have more experience, give them some training to possibly become in a more proactive position, like a planner or an MRO spare parts person that understands the machines and what parts are needed for what machine. So with the increase in budgets, I think that that's something that might be reflective of those numbers, is that we'll need more additional spare parts on site once we get them all optimized to keep our machines up and running. We'll need additional training to go into that, to become experts in those areas. And I think the budgetary numbers, maybe that is kind of a reflection of a period of time that we're kind of working our way out of into a more proactive time. But I kind of like everybody's optimism when it comes to getting increased budgets.
Great. Now I'm going to shift gears a little bit.
Well, I'll just chime in. One thing I want to share there real quick is, before we jump into the AI piece, is that I think this is a direct reflection of the silver tsunami that is ongoing. And so many people want to just stick their head in the sand and hope that this problem won't affect them, or that they're part of that silver tsunami, so they'll be out the door when this really hits the fan. But the reality is that there's a reason that the trades are starting to pay more and more. I think part of the reflection of the budget having to go up is that the labor rates are going up. If you want skilled workers to come in and actually keep your operations running, they're not charging the same rates they were 20 years ago for that same skill set, right? And that's a function of the cost of living and the demand and supply and demand effect of how valuable those folks are. So I think those are some of the functions that we're seeing. And 31% earlier in the report cited that tribal knowledge transfer was a challenge. And so I think this is another reflection of that tribal knowledge showing up, where you're seeing that folks are struggling to standardize training and operations, and they're having to throw more money after it just to keep things stable. Like in my expectation of what I'm seeing, or the expectation I've been seeing, at least anecdotally, from where folks are trying to throw more money, is they're hoping to stay, stable rather than even improve with these increased budgets, as they want to see they can't let things get worse. And so I think there's an opportunity for folks to leverage some of the shift in dynamics of bringing more resources in to help to operate, level up their operations and modernize them a little bit. But the limited staff and expertise is going to continue to become the number one barrier to getting, stronger ROI out of the reliability team. And that's going to, I think, cause it to rise to the top of the priority list, or closer to the top of the priority list for leadership, as they start to see some of the downstream impacts of that. So.
Yeah, those are some great points there, Nick. I noticed on a recent SMRP Carolina chapter meeting, we went up to Midlands Technical College, and they were showing off their machining area up there. And the master instructor was saying, hey, we just had a guy who graduated from here, got all of his certifications, and now he's out making 6 digits. So that there's definitely a point to that silver tsunami that's really building and some of these budgetary numbers. So great point there.
Yeah, that's just a great data point. Like, tell your kids, everyone, that you make the average tradesperson makes a lot more than the average TikTok influencer. So,
yeah,
well, go be productive. Do something good with your time and your skills.
Yep.
Well, Nick, you actually unintentionally gave me a better transition than I was going to have before, because I do believe some of the ways that people are thinking about AI is it's one of the tools to combat this labor shortage, whether it's a silver tsunami, whether it's just the lack of ability to hire those skilled laborers that people need, that they're looking to get efficiencies from technology. And one of those prominent options is AI. We recently had a customer event in Houston, Texas, and one of our longtime customers, when he was talking about his real world experiences, he just made the comment that since a year ago to now, AI is everywhere. AI has invaded the lives of everyday executives, including me. We're like, okay, now let's try this. The reason why I wanted to include this in this session today, because I do think that represents the time compared to when we were having this conversation 12 months ago. I think 12 months ago, AI was a little newer. They were still considering, they were still debating. But I think now, sitting here in 2026, it's here. And now companies are deciding what they're going to do with that. And that's what the data in the report actually shows. So we're actually going to do another poll for those of you, if you don't mind. Just take a couple moments. We're going to throw up another poll that you should be seeing momentarily. Assuming it could be. We'll give it a second to see. Okay. So there's a new poll. You can vote now.
Don't type it in the chat. Put it in the box.
Yeah. Put it.
You put it in the chat if
you can click on the vote now tab, and that will help. And then Madeline, can you throw up the results so we can see the results as they're coming on in?
see the results here in a second.
Oops, sorry, I jumped ahead. Madeline, are you able to share those results, or should we move on?
Sorry, yeah, it's not letting me put them up on stage, so let's just move on.
No worries. Well, I'm going to scroll through with my eyes right now and look at the answers from people who did it in the thread, and apologize for that technical.
I see the results here too. It's like the top one here is we got a lot of more voters on this one than the last one, but 3% for the top fully implemented, which is fantastic. We'd love to chat with you. Partially implemented, 19% is what we're seeing in our live poll here. 22% in the pilot or testing phase, 14% actively evaluating options, 17% planning to implement in 12 months, and 24% have no plans to implement. So it looks kind of similar to what we're seeing here on the on our survey data.
Yeah, it actually does. It's surprisingly similar. I'd say that just in this survey set, the people on the webinar now, it's more like slightly earlier, piloting or partially implementing. And I would argue, I wish I had the confidence of those folks who said that they're fully implemented across multiple processes. With the speed at which AI is coming out to believe you're going fully, I love that confidence because things are changing so fast. But from the data, 58% are using AI to some degree, right? And Nick, based on the numbers you just shared, I would argue it's pretty similar, right?
Yeah,
It's a very similar number.
with less, a little bit less on the fully implemented side on our live poll, but otherwise very, very close. Yeah.
Right. So what we're saying here is that people are actually using AI. The majority of folks are. And in the report that you all get, there's a wide variety of ways that people are using AI and a wide variety of benefits that companies are getting from industrial AI. What we shared here were just some of the ones that showed up in the report. Faster work order completion, better data-driven decisions, better scheduling and resource allocation, building on some of the needs that Dan mentioned earlier on the webinar, right? So there's a wide variety of benefits that companies are getting from AI today. And one of the questions that we really wanted to dig into was how long did it take to actually see measurable value from AI, right? Because this is relatively new. And when you look back to 2025, people were really starting to adopt it. Now, did those efforts turn into tangible benefits? And what the data shared here is that 75% are seeing measurable benefits within 6 months. And in the greater scheme of things, that's really fast, right? So they're finding real benefits. So with that, actually, I'll hand it off to you, Nick. I'd love your reaction. How does this align with what you're hearing out in the market?
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes sense. Is when you find the right application use cases, like the easiest way to distill it, regardless of your technical expertise or training, is that AI is helping people do more with less. I think the folks that are struggling with it, they're over-indexing. They're trying to put AI across everything all at once without the right infrastructure or skill sets to support it. But the disconnect really happens when folks think AI requires becoming a super expert overnight, and it definitely doesn't. There's a lot of small things that you can do to starting today to tangibly improve your operation that sort of have this nice cumulative build up and effect there, and like bring it down to like tactical. What does that mean? Like you can start with simpler use cases where and build trust through small wins and let the team see that AI isn't some scary monster. Helping to standardize, digitize some of the work procedures you're doing. I saw one of our commenters earlier was saying, tribal knowledge is hard to capture without a lot of writing, and you don't have a resident historian on hand. And that's one of the areas where, AI can actually do a pretty good job of helping with transcription and then helping format that and, compile it in a way that makes it useful and readable and helpful later. And so, when I think about sort of where this goes, some people are afraid that AI is going to replace jobs. It's definitely not replacing jobs in the trades, but and even if it did, there's just not enough tradespeople for that to be any meaningful impact on the workforce. It's really around helping the technicians and helping our frontline folks do more with less and helping them be more effective at the moment of work, giving them the information to be safe, efficient, productive. The frontline workers are still going to be the hero of this story, but we have to help. These are the sort of tools and technologies that can help them do better. And I think there's an organization WEF that said like 86% of leaders expect AI to transform their businesses by 2030, and the digital and AI leaders are outperforming the laggards by 2 to 6 times on total shareholder returns across every single sector. So this is an opportunity for your business to leap forward. We're starting to see some very early signs of that, and like some places that have adopted it earlier on, like the finance and legal space. But I think the opportunity to jump ahead of your competition, AI can be a competitive advantage to be on the sort of rising edge of this trend.
Great. Now, Dan, I'd love your reaction both to the data here talking about the benefits, but I'd love for you also if you could share one or maybe two examples of how you've seen companies actually using AI in their operations today.
Yeah, certainly, Jason. And I'm 100% aligned with Nick's answer is that, you can't go eat the elephant, right? Success with AI, I think, happens one stage at a time. Being able to clean up your bill of materials, being able to optimize or utilize it to optimize some PM tasks within the system. That's what we're seeing a lot of out there in the marketplace. But again, without the foundational processes in place, AI alone is not going to solve those foundational problems. And so when you take that on and you're really going forth and adopting AI into your overall programs, just keep in mind, it's just accelerating those things, and it's helping you to achieve. I think everybody on this call would agree that AI is not going away, that it's around to stay. And but in order to really choose specific use cases to where it can be where it can fit in, I think is going to be the critical factor here, because you don't want to and making sure that you have the foundation of a good culture in place prior to expanding the use case for AI.
Love it. And Dan, are there any specific examples you heard of anyone using AI? Just that would be worth sharing with the group?
I mean, I've heard of several organizations using it to optimize PM tasks. I mean, if you are looking at PM tasks in its historical nature, right? A lot of folks build a PM program based upon OEM specifications, where the manufacturer of a machine might say, okay, this is how much you should PM the machine. Well, we all know that that's going to be over PMing that machine. And so what AI has done, and I've heard several companies work to optimize these PM cases where it might say check belt, check bearing, and then take an optimal mix of the OEM specifications as well as practical knowledge that's coming out of the maintenance technicians' head. So just some specific examples when it comes to PM tasks, I would say, Jason, is where a lot of folks are utilizing this to kind of optimize what should be done to a piece of equipment on a weekly, monthly, annual basis to what is actually done to a piece of equipment.
Got it. Got it. Thanks. Thank you for that detail.
Yeah.
And I do want to throw it out to the audience. We're going to open it up to questions now. We've got a lot of questions throughout this webinar, but if there's anything front of mind, please feel free to chime them in now. But for the last question, I'm going to ask directly for Nick and Dan. In the forward of the report, Nick actually said that this report exists to give them the proof points to bring the rest of their organizations along. And the them is the maintenance, reliability, and operations leaders, all of you on this call. And that actually aligned with one of the comments in the thread earlier, was that while the people on this call might value reactive and preventative similarly, it's the executives that have a different perspective on value. And this kind of leads to one of the things that, Dan, I know you're passionate about, that one of the challenges that teams frequently face is how do they articulate the business value of their efforts to leaderships and execs, the people who maybe aren't close enough to the floor. So given that you spend time thinking about this, Dan, like, what advice do you have for the people on this webinar that are looking to effectively communicate the business value of all of their work to leadership and executives?
No, that's a great question, Jason. And in any reliability initiative or process improvement initiative, I think there are two critical elements, and I always emphasize this. You have plant partnerships and management commitment. So if you think of it about it, plant partnerships is a partnership between maintenance and operations. Reliability is not just a maintenance initiative. It takes both to be successful. So, and a lot of times within an organization, these are at battle with each other. And so they really have to understand that as an operations team, I need to provide that time for maintenance to get in there and do these proactive activities to keep our assets up and running. With that being said, it needs to be driven from the top down. So having executive sponsorship is of the utmost importance. And that requires building a business case. The business case can just be the terms of, okay, if I reduce or if I improve my OEE on this production line by 3 points, what does that mean to the organization at the end of the day? Most executives come from a sales and marketing background and not an engineering and manufacturing and maintenance background. So they have to understand the value of not only getting product out the door, but the value that we're saving by maintaining our assets and being able to get our product out the door in an efficient manner. So just being able to quantify that business case by, reduced spare parts, decreased overtime, decreased contractor costs, higher output of the machines, which can be measured in OEE if you get that complex. But you can do it very simple. You can put together a very simple business case based upon some metrics that you have out there and present those numbers back to leadership within the organization so they understand the quantifiable benefits at the end of the day.
So Dan, I don't want to oversimplify what you're saying, but one of the things that I believe I heard, I want to make sure that is right. Like, so there's all these metrics, let's just say OEE or various metrics we have. It would help the people on the call if they translated those into hard dollars, the things that the executives care about the most. So take that extra step of translating those core metrics that everyone measures all the time and translate that into the hard dollars, which is the language that the executives speak. Is that a fair observation?
Exactly, 100%, Jason.
And I get said, I'll sit in front of a room, and I'll talk to a room full of executives. I was actually doing that earlier today, and I'll asked. It was a room of 40 different executives in industrial manufacturing companies. How many of them knew what an hour of downtime cost their most critical production line? 3 hands went up. You might be one of those in the room here watching or listening later that has that same issue. We can't. It's great, Dan, if you can get me my OEE. If we can measure that. If you don't know those numbers, if you don't know what an hour of downtime costs, if you don't know what how many hours of downtime you actually have, and not how many you report on your spreadsheet that you send up the chain, how many you actually have, that's your business case. That's a business critical number that your operations needs to know, because like the part that I see a lot of leadership, operational leaders sort of miss as they get into this AI digital transformation wave and get all excited about it is they don't understand that, if you can get smart on reliability, they have to treat it as a business strategy and not a cost center. And the data in this report helps give teams proof points to help bring their rest of their organization along. You want to make sure you're not one of the less glamorous statistics on next year's report. Try to be ahead of the curve. But if you aren't there yet, know that this is an area that a lot of folks are struggling with. So there is a true competitive advantage to be had if you can kind of start to corral your leadership on understanding that if we know these numbers, if we know what our downtime costs look like, if we know what our parts inventory spend is, if we know what our hot shipping costs are, I mean, you can it's death by 1,000 cuts is where you get all this excess costs and waste that sort of fills the operation and MRO budgets. And if you can start to sort of chop wood and knock those back, you'll start to earn a lot of credibility with the leadership team, because those are sort of thought of as fixed costs in the way that they're planning for the business. And if you can prove to them that they're actually not fixed, that they're actually a function of your team's inability to, run processes that support a data-driven approach to reliability, that'll help put you on the right path and help you communicate the value of your function to your leadership team, who may not have that, that engineering point of view that you might take to it, and by nature of your work. So
no, Nick, it's 100%. Through SMRP, we're forming a partnership with the Institute of Asset Management, just because we have very good complementing bodies of knowledge. The IAM, or the Institute of Asset Management, focuses on more of an overarching strategy, a policy, and strategic asset management plan, and is more white collar nature, whereas the SMRP is more blue collar nature. But having those coincide, and like you had alluded to, if you don't know anything else, just document those downtime numbers, quantify that back to the leadership so they understand the value at the end of the day. And then if you wanted to get a specific, OEE can get complicated. I brought up TEEP, total effective equipment performance. and looking at short and short stuff like that can get a little complicated as well too. But just bring some very simple, logical numbers to those folks to help you award that funding. Show them, quick victories throughout the process to fund that larger effort. And then next thing you know, you're going to be kidding, and you'll be running it all, popping at all cylinders and ready to adopt MaintainX to its full capacity.
I mean, at risk of sounding condescending, like, there's a comment here. It says that, engineering management speak different language. I mean, if you're rehearsing this talk with your boss, if you've got kids, if they're like under 14 years old, even if they're not, explain what you're trying to do to them. If they can't understand it, there's a high likelihood you're not speaking it simple enough. So Dan, you're right on the money there. You got to keep it, don't get into the weeds on if you're showing them reports with oil viscosity and all this other stuff, you've lost the plot. It doesn't mean those things don't matter. It just means that you've got to simplify it so that leadership understands it in dollars and cents. Hey, if we invest $100,000 here, we're going to help save the business $1.5 million. And show me that vending machine. I can put that money in. I'll find every $100,000 I can and funnel into that machine until it stops making me money, right? And you want to make it so easy that it sounds stupid to say no. And that's where I think engineers overthink it sometimes with their with all those brains.
Well, thank you both for that. In addition to everyone on this call getting the report, you're also going to get a recording of this webinar, as I mentioned at the top. So I think that those are some really great insights that you both shared. And now I'm going to jump into a couple of the questions that we got through the event, through the panel here. One thing that I thought was interesting, someone commented that they support AI programs, but that person feels that it's hindering their greener technicians regarding understanding the root causes of issues in learning a troubleshooting skill set. I think that's, I have my own opinions, but before I chime in, I'd love, Dan, what's your reaction to that?
I was thinking about this too, because we're in a funny phase right now with, the baby boomers are kind of taking a step out, right? And the millennials are coming in who are much more technology focused. So, I've always looked at, something that's really great. And I learned from working at a German manufacturing company, are apprenticeship programs and mentorship programs. Okay. So if you could marry the two, between maybe an older worker who's more skilled with their hands, can go out there and knows the machine inside and out, versus somebody who is technology proficient, and blend those worlds together to share. Because your historical apprenticeship program just, hey, go follow around the old person and learn from them. Whereas I think that there can be some reverse dynamics there when it comes to those sorts of things. So great point there. What do I focus in on, the practical application of techniques or the technology that's there? Well, we got to marry the two in today's generations. I think, in today's environment in 2026, you need to marry the two. You need to marry the practical application, because I think the younger generation wants to learn, but then also help the older generation learn the new dynamic principles associated with AI, predictive maintenance, those sorts of things.
Love it. The only thing I'll build off of it as well is that we also have to lean in how different people learn, right? Like, so if the behaviors of folks, I've had the opportunity over recent months to go see our customers using our AI products. And some of the young people, that's just the natural way they like to learn. If they have a question, they want to look for it immediately. So having some sort of tool, in this case, having AI at their fingertips, that is how they like to learn. Yes, they don't have that institutional knowledge of the 20 to 30-year-old vet in the back of their head who just knows it. But these people are self-driven. They want to find the solution for the problem. They're not going to wait for excuses. And they want that instantaneously, right? They don't want to have to go find that person who has all that knowledge, go find that manual and sift through it. So there is a balance. I think it's a very valid point that, we need the next generation also to learn these skills, but we also have to meet them where they are and give them the tools that allows them to work the way they want to work. Nick, anything for you to add on this topic?
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me of like when I was in high school, I had this like 60-something-year-old math teacher who had a strict rule of no calculators on our tests. And it's like you'll never walk around with a calculator in your pocket. You're gonna have to learn this math the right way. Yada yada yada. And like, uh, no, I don't feel like I'm better off than someone 15 years younger than me that knows that just is able to get the right answer. And to be like even more clear, like AI is a like exponentially and infinite and almost infinite times more powerful than any calculator I ever had access to in high school. It's really like helping them understand what the right questions to ask are, helping making sure that you're using tools that give them the guardrails so that they're not going to ask it things incorrectly, or the way we build our tool is that there's no way it's going to give them advice that's going to get somebody hurt or break the machine, make the machine worse. If it doesn't know the right way to fix something, it says it doesn't know, go ask your supervisor. If you have them using some crazy free version of some AI tool out there, it may have them pulling wires apart before you know it. So, making sure they have access to the right tools, I think is fine. Is the guardrail you need, but they're going to learn through practice and activation, like Jason, like the learning style. They'll learn by doing. They'll start to absorb that. But the last thing you want to do to help their development is just don't be that 60-year-old math teacher saying you can't use a calculator, because I can do math in my head, but I don't know what that does for me. I think it takes up room that I could learn something else because I've got a phone in my pocket that does math pretty good.
All right. I've been going through the questions. We've actually addressed most of them. One of them I want to address, there was a question early on about what is the average PM completion rate for these companies? To be very transparent, that's not a specific question we asked in this survey. This is data that we have as MaintainX because based on our customer set, and we can follow up with you on that. But the purpose of this report was to be really an industry report based on people who may be MaintainX customers, might not be MaintainX customers. For that specific question, though, we didn't ask that here, even though it's a great question. And please, if you're a MaintainX customer, follow up with your contact and we can get you that data. Or if you're not, just reach out to us and we'll follow up with you. There's no secret there. I just don't have that at my fingertips and I don't want to misspeak. With that, I want to stress you'll all get the report. You'll all get the recording of this. And we really appreciate you all taking the time today. We know you all have very busy schedules. We hope this was helpful. And with that, we will wrap up the webinar.